So instead of speaking about like grassroots organizing as a very vague term, I'm going to be speaking mostly about local groups and local organizing. And so we'll start by defining what local groups are. Then we'll move on to why is local organizing so important, and we'll spend quite a fair bit of time on this. And then two other questions that we'll broadly be talking about are how can a national campaign benefit from local autonomy? And also how can the culture of a national campaign be embedded through local organizing? So yeah, let's get started. You can change the slide, David. Yes. So before we get into Canadian geography, as everyone I'm sure is really excited with this map, I'm briefly going to say what local groups are. And I would define them simply as spaces that people can come into and campaign and meet others. They're local because they are already where the person is based. So in the case of Youth Demand, usually we organize around cities. But in Just a Ball, it was mostly around regions. So this can take different forms. And I know that in Extension Rebellion, it was also around boroughs. There were so many groups. In terms of the structure of the local groups in Youth Demand, I won't speak too much about this because it's not that relevant, but just to give everyone a bit of an idea of what we're talking about. We have a local structure that replicates the national structure, which means that we have core teams of a few committed people who come up with a mobilization plan that will fit the city or the region where people are based. They'll receive a bit of guidance from the national team, and that can look like prioritizing to run community events, for example. So what do local groups do? They run events, they run local actions, but beyond that, they are trying to create routes in a specific location. They are volunteer run, and usually they work very hard at engaging new volunteers. So why is it so important to have an element of local organizing in a campaign? That's what we'll get into. So the national campaign definitely plays an important role in bringing people in, but the local side of things also has a major benefit. Sorry. And these benefits are creating this sense of community, which is super powerful to keep people involved over the long term. So why is local organizing so important as well is because you will get a local knowledge that you can't have if you're not actually in the place, and you'll be able to use methods to mobilize people that will speak to them. And that's where the map finally comes in. I wanted to speak about when I was still living in Canada, and there were discussions about setting up a project that was similar to Just a Boil. So we had meetings with people from the UK, and they advised us to do this grand tour of the country to launch our new campaign, putting events all over the country. And frankly, sorry, I think someone had, yeah, thank you. Quite frankly, when someone told me this, that I had to do the tour of Canada to set up my campaign, I thought this was extremely daunting. As you probably imagine, there's thousands of kilometers, and it would take a very long time to put events all over the country, whereas in the UK, this is maybe something that's more realistic. Of course, I'm explaining this on a big scale. This is also true for cities and regions. You'll have local knowledge that is super useful. You can change the slide, David. Thank you. Before I pass to Arthur, I wanted to speak a bit about the mobilization principles as well, because we have these, because we've learned what are the best practices to mobilize through our experience, and I wanted to bring them back. I know they've been in like previous sections, but I wanted to bring them back because it would actually be super difficult to put them in practice if we didn't have local organizing and if we didn't have local groups. And for instance, when we speak about proximity, so that's the first mobilization principle, this is super important in terms of local organizing. It's an accessible entry point for people to join the campaign and get involved. It's much easier to get involved with a campaign that is putting on an event, right on the corner of your house, a cafe that you've been to before, than to just join a Zoom. We can try to recreate these online spaces that are accessible for people to join a campaign, but you won't have the benefit of creating this local identity and of building these personal connections in a sense of community, which yeah brings us to sociability, which is our second mobilization principle that is really important. Yeah, building that sense of community, as we know, keep people involved in the long term. The third mobilization principle is also really related to local organizing, because this local community empowers everyone to resist. It creates this sense of solidarity. You know that you have people waiting for you outside, the police station if you get arrested, and that's because people live in your region and because you know them and they'll be there to welcome you. And that is, yeah, making you more resilient in the long run. And finally, around momentum, this one could be a bit harder to see how local organizing plays a role in this, but there will always be cycles of momentum. There will always be peaks of energy in a movement, and it's important to be able to continue to uh, build a movement outside of these cycles. And local community is really important for that, for retention and to keep people involved in a movement, and use the more fallow times to upskill people and train and do other things. So I'll pass to Arthur now, who will be speaking about how local groups are also important to embed the campaign DNA. Yeah, so I'll pass over to you, Arthur.
Nice. Thanks so much, Marilu. Can everyone hear me? My laptop microphone can be a little dodgy sometimes. Yeah, I'm getting some wiggle fingers. Nice. Um, okay, yeah, I'm going to be talking about the how the local and the national kind of relate to each other. Let me just set a timer as well so I don't yap on forever. Um, because there's a fair bit of nuance to it, to this relationship between local groups and like national organizing, the national level and the local level. But it's an essential relationship basically for the style of organizing that we do. If we don't have this relationship, it all falls apart. So next slide. Oh, we're already on it. Hell yeah. So to put it in abstract terms, and this is very abstract, the growth of a campaign and the top line characteristics of a campaign, i.e. the what we do and the how we do it, exists in the relationship between local and national. Now, what the fuck do I mean by that? That's what I'm going to be talking about, because that is a bit, yeah, doesn't make a whole lot of sense on its own. But there's kind of three main points to this that I'm going to break down. So the campaign growth, the what we do, and the how we do it. These kind of key aspects of yeah how we organize is dependent upon this relationship between local and national. So next slide. Number one, campaign growth. So yeah, this is basically the cycle of momentum. Marilu spoke about this a little bit, and we've spoken about this in the past as well in the mobilization session. We're a momentum-driven organization, and that means that we take aspects from highly structured organizations like unions, who like slowly build up, and organizations like mass protests, which have these kind of like big explosions. And we try and blend them together to give some structure to this like whirlwind moment. And how this happens in practice is through a cycle. So first of all, you get the escalation. This is people out. This is people going out, agitating, doing actions, all this kind of stuff. Going on a big national action phase. You see the little people there like jumping and shouting about. Some getting arrested. I think they're getting arrested in the bottom left. You have some with their signs, and then them sitting, doing a sit-in, I guess. So you have the escalation, agitate, makes attention, all this kind of stuff. And then this creates active popular support. It brings new people in. And if this was kind of like mass protest, this is where it would end with the big active popular support. You hope that a mass mobilization or an increase in mobilization helps you get your goal. If it doesn't, oh well. If it does, great. However, that doesn't tend to work. And you need to tend to build more than that, obviously, rather than just have one run up and then kind of leave it. It takes many action phases to win, basically. And so then the next phase is the absorption phase. This is where you get all the new people that you've brought in and actually integrate them into the organization, align them with the DNA, make it clear what you're about, what you're doing, why you're doing it, all this kind of stuff, make them feel part of the community. And this absorption happens on the local level. You can even see them in the picture, kind of like, breaking off into their little local groups, or basically, or like smaller segments, because you can't obviously make, 100 people or whatever feel equally part of a group. So you got to break it down to properly absorb them, properly train them, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, this is kind of you can see the cycle, and you can see the relationship between national and local perfectly displayed in this cycle, right? The national kind of alone you could see as mass protest, stuff like Egypt or Tunisia during the revolution, where hundreds of thousands of people were out on the streets, but there wasn't much structure to it. You could see local organizing alone as like highly structured organizing, unions, community based, usually aiming to like get like a stop sign moved or something like this, not going to cause a revolution. However, having them both together is a momentum driven organization, the national and the local, the active popular support and the absorption. Yeah, hopefully this explains how, like, and in this way you can create this cycle, this local and national coming together to grow and grow and grow and keep it going. So then after absorption, you go back to escalation, but on a bigger scale because you got more people trained up, basically. So that's campaign growth. On the next slide, we talking a bit about the what and the how we do it. So these are like the top line characteristics of a campaign, and this is explained, or like this kind of comes through the local groups. So to explain what I mean by this, local groups are often the first entry point for people joining the campaign, right? A lot of events are run on the local level. This means it's their first interaction. So in this way, the local groups act as ambassadors for the entire organization. People will judge the entire organization based on this little, like, this little social they go to or something like that. Not to put on the pressure too much. But this means that the national identity, or what people perceive as the national identity, is expressed through the local groups, right? So this is people's first impressions of what we're about. It seems kind of obvious to say, but I think it's worth pointing out that the national and the local share a DNA, right? And it needs to be expressed through both of this. I've tried to kind of illustrate this with Otpor, who's going to come up a couple times after this. You've got them out on the streets, their big national demonstration. Everyone's like super keen to get involved. How do they actually get involved? Through the local, through signing up with a little sheet saying where they are and all this kind of stuff. And it's only through that relationship that like Otpor actually managed to basically managed to overthrow a dictator in the 90s. We talked about them before, so I'm not going to. But for people who don't know, yeah, Serbian movement in the 90s who overthrew a dictator, Slobodan Milosevic, through this like very clever kind of local and national organization. So yeah, the main characteristics of a campaign are expressed through a local group normally. So for people wanting to join, yeah, the national identity is expressed through a local group. So you need this relationship. To go a bit more into the what, if we go to the next slide, please. So yeah, to go into a bit more detail about those two things now. So that's kind of how the relationship works. Now, what they actually are, I'll talk about. And in terms of what we do, this relates to our primary purpose. So this is our kind of top line goal that everything in one way or another should be pointing towards. So to use the examples of the umbrella campaigns, you've got Youth Demand, whose primary purpose is total trade embargo on Israel and to advance the nonviolent revolution. You've got Assemble, whose primary purposes are to run local assemblies and replace the House of Lords with a House of the People. And you've got Just Stop Oil, whose primary purpose was to end new oil and gas licenses, which they did, which is why now Just Stop Oil is hanging up the high vis and something new will be coming along. So the advancement of this primary purpose happens in a conversation between national and local, right? It doesn't, you need both. Local provides the people, the community, the organization. National provides the coordination and cohesion. So rather than being in tension, the local strengthens the national position when it kind of reproduces these big ideas, these primary purposes, talks about them on the local level, and points their organizing towards it. If we go to the next slide, we can add some theory to this I know everyone's loving some theory. We got Gene Sharp there, a nice blurry picture of Gene Sharp, which I've helpfully labeled as blurry for you guys. I don't know why I did that. But he's got all his books behind him. That's how you know he's legit. And he's kind of the godfather of non-violent strategy. He wrote a lot of the books on it. He obviously didn't invent it, but he wrote a lot of the kind of academic study around it. And he talked about this idea of putting your strong spot on the opponent's weak spot. It's this idea of asymmetrical warfare, which we've spoken about before in the strategy session, where basically it's this idea of if we try and meet the British government on their, in a symmetrical way, i.e., if we go out with guns and stuff, they got the tanks, they got the helicopters, they're going to absolutely obliterate us, right? Which is why it needs to be asymmetrical. We need to come from a different angle. This is why this is part of the reason why we're an explicitly non-violent organization and we have an explicitly non-violent strategy. I think that the example that was used, or the metaphor that was used in the session one, is if you want to beat David Beckham, don't play him at football, play him at chess. You don't want to be playing on the same playing field. So there's two elements to this, right? To putting our strong spot on the opponent's weak spot. This is what this asymmetrical warfare means. If we came with our guns and stuff, that would be putting our weak spot on their strong spot. That's exactly what they want us to do. They're dying for us to come at them with guns, so they have the excuse to come at us with their even bigger guns. There's two parts of this. So part one, if we can get a little click, David, our strong spot is coming together as one, right? Not being disparate. I think everyone kind of is on the same page with this. If we act in solidarity, if we act together, that's our strength. That's, what we really have. We have the fact that there's thousands and thousands of people who are currently being abandoned by the state, being fucked over in so many ways, being pissed off. So our strength is to come together, not acting disparate. And their weak spot, if again we get a nice little click, thank you, is highlighting their moral crimes. So to use youth demand as an example, but this also applies to Just Stop Oil. But the very fact that the government is still licensing arms exports to Israel is a weak spot, right? It's fucked up. It's in breach of humanitarian law. It's facilitating crimes against humanity. It's a weak spot just by the fact that they're doing it, which is why by causing disruption and raising attention, you create pressure through scrutiny, right? Pushing down on that weak spot. It's the same with Just Stop Oil and new oil and gas. Basically, the fact that they're still doing it is crazy despite the climate crisis, licensing new oil and gas, which is why we do public disruption. You can see if we did if, I don't know, if Labour were building new houses, I doubt they are, but if they were, and we were causing public disruption to raise awareness of this, that's not a weak spot because that's a good thing. We'll be raising awareness that's pro-Labour, which is not what we're trying to do. And this kind of explains, I think, the relationship between national and local. National is nothing without the local, right? You can't do national campaigns without hundreds of people taking action if you don't have the local groups. However, the local will struggle to have a national impact without some form of national coordination. This is why we have standardized messaging, for example. Again, to use the example of youth demand, the more people saying a specific thing, the more attention there is and the more pressure there is, which is why there's these kind of national guidelines. This means that there are certain guidelines that local groups need to act in accordance with so that national cohesion is maintained. Things like, messaging, non-violence, primary purposes, and values, which we'll come to later. If local groups had no autonomy, they wouldn't be able to create a unique local identity, a particular community that people can connect to. However, if there was total autonomy, as in no guidelines whatsoever, then local groups could end up doing kind of random, disconnected things that never come together as a whole, i.e., and this would not be putting our strong spot on the opponent's weak spot. A great example of this is Oppor, yet again, coming back to them. If we can go to the next slide, and I'm kind of cheating on this one a little bit because I'm just straight reading a quote from a book, which feels very cheap, but it's a good quote. A great example is Oppor, which aimed to create something at once more diffuse, reaching across the country, and more purposeful, with all the localized actions contributing to a unified strategy. However, contrary to the assumption that decentralization means that anything goes, the opposite is arguably true. They often require even stronger guidelines and more explicit operating procedures if they are to be effective. Yeah, this is an uprising. Mark and Paul Engler. I've got my copy right here. That's how you know it's real. Yeah, again, this book's come up a lot, so I highly recommend anyone for people to read that. There's a great entry point into all of this stuff. You got a little Opal person putting up the signs there as well. So hopefully, yeah, that kind of gave a insight into campaign growth and the what we do, the primary purposes, and how both of these rely on a relationship between national and local. So the next is the how we do it. And this is where values and culture comes in. If we can get a little click, David, hell yeah, there it is. So values and culture, these are the things that guide us in our primary purpose, right? This is, if our primary purpose is what we do, in terms of, our strategy and all that kind of stuff, the values are how we do that, how we go about making that happen. And they provide the kind of ultimate backstop for how we work. So these non-negotiable things that can hopefully create culture, basically. If we get another little click, we've got a cheeky little culture quote from a Managing to Change the World, which is a book on like management for organizations basically trying to change the world similar to us. And they say culture is the invisible force that transmits messages about how we do things around here. So it can create that sort of sense of that almost intangible, sense of how we do things, how it's done. And by embedding values, you can get people to internalize how we do things, create this culture, which can make us more unified, more efficient when it's needed, and can help guide our day-to-day work. And again, this embedding usually happens on the local level, even though it contributes to the national, because as I've hopefully explained, it contributes to the primary purpose. It works towards our primary purpose. And again, this has been massively successful in the past, using Otpor as another example. I don't know what this picture is, but I fucking love it. I think it was on the book of Marovich's on the cover of Marovich's book, who was a co-founder of Otpor. And like I think it's Otpor because it's Marovich who's using it, but it was just too funny for me not to use. I absolutely adore it. The guy's little face just accepting his fate. I assume he's consenting. But yeah, again, to use Opera as an example, just going to straight up read a quote, driest technique out there. But Opera, and it's again from This Is an Uprising, Mark and Paul Engler were comparing Opera to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which is Martin Luther King's organization. And Opera, who was trying to sustain momentum for a much longer time than the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, took the process of absorption even further. The group established an extensive series of mass trainings. These were courses of 10 hours or more, designed to empower participants. By the time new participants made it through the initiation, they'd internalized the movement's DNA. And you can kind of see why they wanted to extend this process of absorption, right? If we think back to the cycle of momentum, this is how we grow. This is how we move on to the next stage, escalate even more. And it makes sense because Otpor was a revolutionary organization, right? They were trying to oust the dictator, whereas the SCLC was more reformist, at least to start with like particular aims like desegregating Birmingham, Alabama, which is why you can see that Otpor kind of needs this longer time scale. And the way that they did this, the way that they achieved this was through, mass trainings, getting people to internalize the DNA, the values which are part of that. And that happened again on the local level. So yeah, typical training stretched over the course of a week in Monday through Friday evening sessions. Discussion started in an office or a classroom and often continued at a bar later the same night. A New York Times correspondent called Otpor part political movement, part social club. Again, coming back to that idea of sociability, the in-person, absolute win for the in-person groups here. This is how you get people feeling part of the community, feeling connected to what you're doing. And to finish off the dry reading out, at the end of the week of training, New recruits were asked to plan and execute an action themselves, putting the skills they'd just learned to immediate use. Only then were they officially considered members of the movement. The number of people in a given session might be small, 7 or 8 participants was typical, but when repeated hundreds of times, the trainings integrated extraordinary numbers. So you can see how local chapters holding their own trainings and like integrating people creates absorption through embedding DNA, basically, right? Through embedding values and teaching people like how we do things so that they can just sort of like go off and you can be sure that what they do will act in line with national guidelines, will contribute to a national goal, basically, which is exactly what we're trying to mimic in many ways. Clearly, the next step for us is to get this kind of training, get it as a mass training. Everyone in all 56 people in this being able to deliver a training like this across the country. That's how we massively scale up, right? And that's part of the point of this. And I think like what's kind of what's amazing to me and about Otpor and how they managed to do this is that by the time Otpor had, I think it was 20,000 members, so many trainings were underway in so many different localities that the obvious locations for gatherings, so like community centers and youth clubs, were constantly booked. They had more difficulty finding the physical space needing to train than the actual leaders to train people, right? This like amazing example of like upskilling and getting people into these leadership roles, exactly as everyone in this room will be doing. Um, so yeah, that's the relationship between local and national. Hopefully, it's a bit of a nuanced one, but hopefully, yeah, people can see how the kind of growth of a campaign relies on it, as well as transmitting kind of what we do and how we do it. These, absolutely fundamental things for success, for upskilling new people, can't exist without both the local and the national working together. And yeah, it obviously needs both to make it happen. So yeah, that's kind of and that's how we're going to make it happen through these trainings. It's how we're going to make this revolution come alive. Um, okay, we're going to go into a breakout room now. I think we've got the question on the next slide. Oh, oh, there it is. Um, I had to use the same picture because I just find it so funny. But yeah, the question is, how can we balance local autonomy and national coordination to create a strong revolutionary organization? I think we've got about a bit under 10 minutes for this. Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about what is actually our culture. Yeah, so Arthur has been speaking about why it's important to be able to embed the culture in local groups. And so I'll be talking about what it actually is for us. And the values is where I'll start. I'll just wait until David has a chance to put up the slide. Of course, yeah, we'll be going into the values, but as you heard, Otpor had a week of training on this stuff, and this is maybe going to last 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So see this as an introduction and as a way to familiarize yourself with what we are about and how we want to work together mostly as well. So the values that we have within Umbrella, so that we share between Youth Man, Assemble, and Just Up World are trust, love, courage, humility, and creativity. I know here, like, bear with me, it can sound a bit wishy-washy to be like, we love each other, we trust each other, we're humble, we're so brave, but that's not what it's about. It's not about saying these things and saying the words that sound nice to give a good vibe, and that's not why they're there. They're there to guide us in practice and in the work that we do. So I'll explain what we actually mean by them, and I'll try to really root it in practice so that it doesn't sound just very annoying and just to say these things. So when we say, when we talk about trust and trusting each other in practice, this means that we trust new people who walk through the door to be able to do big things. So when we're at an event and we have a new person coming in, they have a lot of skill and we know that they will be able to contribute to this big primary purpose that we're trying to achieve. Like we're trying to do something really big, and we'll need a lot of people to get involved. We'll need mass participation, which means that we'll need to trust each other that we're able to do these things. And yeah, so trust, radical trust is really important for that. And we can see it another way around as well. I think it's also having trust in the people who are making decisions. I think that can be difficult, and it's important to keep people accountable when they're in the leadership role. But I think it's also important to say that trust is also about believing that these people are taking the decisions coming from a place of wanting the success of the campaign and the well-being of people. That they're not necessarily thinking that it's for their ego, because as we'll go into, we have a service orientation, but we'll go over that a bit later in the culture. Love can sound, once again, a bit hippie. We love each other, but it's not really what it's about. Yes, it's about being kind to each other, but it's mostly about what our resistance starts from. Are we in resistance because we are against people that we hate? We believe that it's mostly because of what we love and the fact that we value life over profit, that we value building a society where everyone can be happy and actually live without harm. So that's what love stands for. In terms of courage, I think it speaks a bit for itself, but we're trying to pull off a non-violent revolution, and to do that we're not going to be able to do it through the means that have been used in the past. So we need to be courageous. We need to step out of our comfort zone. So we need to ground our plans that we're making in courage, to make sure that we're stepping outside of that we're confronting the people who are causing harm. Humility is really important, because once again, what we're trying to do is so big, and it's important to recognize that we don't really know what we're doing. We're trying to learn, and we're learning as we go, but we haven't seen a non-violent revolution in the UK in the recent past, or even possibly ever. I don't want to talk about this because I don't know the history books that well. Maybe there was one, but it's something really, really big that we're trying to do, and it's important to be in service to that. And we need to be humble, to be able to take feedback from one another, and to hold each other accountable. It's not about our ego, even though the work that we do is really meaningful. It's not about being the best at it. Sometimes stepping back is the most useful thing you can do. And the last umbrella value that we have is creativity. Creativity is there because, once again, we're trying to do something big, and we'll need to use means that we might not even have imagined yet. Like the ways to do change, we'll need to be creative. The ways to organize will need to be creative as well. Through our actions, we're telling stories, and we want them to be artistic. Slow marching tells a different story from telling shoes in front of putting shoes in front of Keir Starmer's house, and we want to be able to adapt and be reactive depending on what we need. You can change the slide, David, thank you. So I wanted to reiterate that the reason why values are important is not about saying that, but it's because they guide our work. And now I've put the most stereotypical stock images of working, because there's not a YD PowerPoint if there's not a stock image in there that reminds us of school presentations. So I think, what I would highlight as well is that it's our responsibility to constantly bring ourselves to the values and question our practices, and to think about whether they are actually serving us. I think it can be easy to forget about our values, especially if we don't talk about them that much. It can be difficult to remember what are the ways that we want to work together. And it can be easy to tick boxes simply off a list of all the things that we have to do. But it's important to stop and question what we do, because sometimes what we do might not serve us, both as an individual and collectively. For instance, you might be putting on an event, a welcome talk, and you might have been told in the past that you need to put up 500 posters and you'll have people coming to your event. But if that's not the case, yeah, you need to be creative and like reactive and question what you're doing and see if it's serving you. You can change the slide, David. We also have working principles, and this is the last bit of culture that we'll be speaking about before our last breakout room and before we hear from Clementine. But the working principles, this is where we really get even more into practice. It's how we want to really embody our values when we work. So the first one is the deep belief in the work. This means we take what we do seriously. A lot of us, yeah, in local groups sometimes are friends, and that's really nice that we're friends because, yeah, we have a good community. But yeah, sometimes it can be easy to lose sight of the fact that what we're trying to do is really, really serious. And so when we're at a social event, there's a lot of things that we need to pay attention to and that we need to feel responsible for, even though it might like be tempting to just have a good time together. And even though that's really important as well, don't mistake me, like having a good time together is really important for people to want to stay in. We need to be serious about what we do. And so practically, what that means, it means collecting people's data when they come to our events. Yeah, the next person who might be super important in the local group, take on a lot of work, show a lot of leadership, might be this very new person who just walked through the door. And so we need to actually, yeah, make sure that we have their phone number and that we're able to call them the next day or 2 days after, and say, hey, how can you get involved? And we can have that conversation with them. And that's why we do phone banks. That's why we call people soon after the events. It's because, yeah, and it's not because we want to do more grunt work. It's because we know that that's the way to be serious about what we do. Um, this means also paying attention to details when you're at an event. So I think a lot of you were here for the mobilization theory session with Harley when he described what, like how a good event feels, like how like little things can make the difference when you go to an event. So if you have someone who's at the door welcoming you, who's super warm, offering you a cup of tea, introducing you to everyone else in the room, asking you a question about yourself, and then if the room is set up in a way that you're in a circle, you're not in rows, it doesn't feel like a classroom, there's food, that's a very different setting from no one welcoming you, not being a bit stranded in the building, not knowing where you're going, coming into a room, no one saying hi, you're not really sure what's happening. There will be a talk, maybe the content even is great, but the whole experience will be completely different. Paying attention to the micro design of the content as well is super important. That's what we mean by being serious. You'll have It would be really different as an experience for people if you're only talking about facts. There's an endless list of facts of why the world is fucked. But if that's the only thing that you speak about and you don't try to explain things in a clear way, it's only academic language. If there's no personal connection to the story, then it will be much harder to connect. So that is kind of what we mean by the deep belief in the work, is constantly being able to analyze the details of what we do and adapting them as well if they're not working for us. The second working principle is that a spark starts small. The S is in the wrong place. It's not sparks start small, but it's okay. I'm sure everyone's here with me. What that means is that we have a belief that a few people can do big things. The examples that we look at sometimes of nonviolent revolutions, we're talking about hundreds, thousands of people. It can be hard to think that that can one day be something that we have contributed to create. But that is super important to believe, and there's a lot of examples of mass mobilizations that started with just a few people. In welcome talks, we often talk about the civil rights movement and how it started with 14 people going to take a bus, side by side, 14 young people. And that's what like that failed, and then and then you move on and you build upon that. So I think it's important to remember that, and it can help you when you feel demoralized as well. It's like no one showed up to my welcome talk that I have like spent so much time um preparing. Like I booked this venue, I leafleted for it. It's okay, like you'll do another one, you'll analyze why it didn't work that way, and yeah, just need to keep going. And at one point, yeah, the spark, the few people will create something big. um yeah, Arthur is sharing another example in the chat from their section, which is like Outport only has 7 to 8 people per training. Yeah, so we already have more people in this room, 54 people. But yeah, it starts small and then you build from there. The final working principle is acting in service, and I've talked about this already, and it ties into other values that we have spoken about. But it's about humility. It's about letting go of the ego. This work, yeah, is hard, and it's okay if you're not doing the best job that you can at it. It's just important to be able to recognize when you're not being in service and when you possibly need to step back. That might just be, that you're more skilled at doing something else. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just a good thing to keep each other accountable of. And I think an important part of this as well is the culture of feedback, is being able to give each other live feedback and to be able to take it as well. And the reason why we give feedback is because we're serious about the work. It's because we're in service to what we're trying to do, and learning by giving each other feedback is a good way to do it. So this is a short overview of our culture and how they can be reflected in practice. We'll get a lot more into this in we'll talk a lot more about culture in other sessions. But a final thing that I wanted to speak about is how we are also there's one other value that is an umbrella that is not in the main values, but it's called unity, not uniformity. And I think that what Clementine will be speaking about will be touching a bit on this, but it's about the fact that we don't have to agree all the time on everything, and it's great to be different. But we know that by just going off and creating another group, that won't necessarily be the solution. That is much more, it's a good thing to stay together and to try to work through the issues that could be recreated in another group as well. So it's okay not to all think the same thing, not to be uniform, but it's a good thing to try and work through this together and to communicate criticism in a way that is constructive, which is also part of this feedback culture of being in service. I think we'll go into breakout rooms now. And I think what would be really good to get everyone to try to do, oh, there was an animation that we missed, but it's okay, we can just move on. Is I've named a lot of examples of how we can embody the values in practice. But it'd be good to think about it in the breakout rooms. What are other examples of how we can embody these values? Can we think about if you've been a mobilizer, other things that you've been paying attention to, other ways that you've been doing this. If not, you might have been to an event where someone has done something that has made you think of this value as well. Yeah, can go into breakout rooms. Magic of Zoom.
All of you here. I'm going to do my best to cover as much as I can in a short amount of time. I often speak with organizing groups on this topic, and I tend to speak for longer than I'm going to be speaking today. So I will try to pack it in, but I shared some specific links to episodes of my podcast that go into these topics in greater detail. So see this as an introduction, and if you want to go deeper, like I recommend checking out the podcast because we go into a lot more detail. So basically, like what I talk about in my work is a topic that nobody likes to talk about. It's not popular to talk about this. It's stressful and kind of scary to talk about this, but it's absolutely essential that we talk about it because when we are doing really, really important political organizing, such as organizing against the climate crisis, we need to be able to be effective in our work and we need to be prepared for obstacles that may prevent us from doing our work. And so, just in the same way as organizers are prepared for the reality of police, we need to be aware that our own communities can unfortunately inhibit us from doing our political work. And so, many of us have probably seen online callouts, like interpersonal conflict, accusations being leveraged online at individuals or at groups, like political organizing groups. And some of you may have also witnessed groups disbanding because of this. And so I'm, almost 40 years old and have been around the left for a couple decades and have witnessed this many, many times where political organizers are unable to do their political work because of accusations that are leveraged against them. And so I think a lot of leftists, a lot of organizers, when they see this, they think, okay, well, these people must have done something really, really wrong if they're getting this negative attention. And so the answer is we just aren't going to do anything wrong, right? We're gonna make sure we do everything right, and then we're not going to get this attack. But unfortunately, that doesn't work, and the attacks still come, and then people are unprepared for them. So basically, cancel culture is a phenomenon. The right has their own version of cancel culture, but on the left, we have our own version of cancel culture where we attack each other and accuse each other of things, and can be very like dehumanizing, unforgiving, and leave no space for disagreement or conflict resolution. When cancel culture tactics are directed at political organizers, political organizing groups, we call this wreckerism. And so wreckerism is when accusations, grievance, conflict prevents political organizations from doing what they are saying that they're trying to do. It derails and prevents. And sometimes this takes the form of like a public call out, but it can also take the form of within the group, like endless conflict, endless grievance that seemingly can't be resolved. And so, one of the reasons that this happens is because we are facing such extreme and overwhelming powers, right? We're facing down capitalism. We're facing down governments that are just ignoring us. We are watching the climate crisis unfold in real time. And many of us are feeling extreme helplessness and powerlessness in our bodies in a really stressful way, right? We want to feel like we can achieve something, but the goals that we are trying to achieve are so enormous and the wins can feel so rare that we can get a certain kind of catharsis, a certain kind of feeling of success when we attack other people because we may not be able to take down the government easily, but we can take down each other, right? And so it performs a sort of emotional role, like a release valve of all of the stress and tension that we feel from all of the helplessness. But what it does is the opposite of what we want because it completely undermines our power and it prevents us from actually being able to organize towards the real wins that we actually want to achieve. Another thing that can be going on is that people are not really doing okay. Many of us are emotionally not doing okay, right? We don't necessarily have the emotional supports in our lives that we need. And so sometimes we show up to political organizing hoping that it's going to be a space that will meet our emotional needs. And when we do that, we can put demands on the organizing space that are inappropriate and that the organizing space cannot meet. For example, people can feel that a conflict is not over until they feel emotionally validated, seen, and held by the group, right? And this is something that, of course, we want in our interpersonal relationships, but it isn't always something that is appropriate or possible within an organizing space. In part because time, energy, attention is an extremely limited resource, right? Everybody who's working in an organizing space is doing so, either for free or for very little pay. And we're all stretched extremely thin. So when we're taking up huge amounts of time on grievance and interpersonal disagreement, we can't get our work done. When we take it to the level of reputational attacks online, This is very, very serious, and we need to understand that like our movements cannot afford this. We need to handle internal disagreement internally and not allow that to spill over on the internet where now the trust that is so important, that has already been underlined as a fundamental value, is now being deeply eroded online. So we really want to avoid doing that. But of course, if it's happening, we need to know like how do we address it? And the best way to address it is not to pour gasoline on the fire and continue to engage in it and to try to move away from the public space and go back into the organizing space so that we're not having online spectacles. One of the really important things that I am going to just touch on really briefly that is part of this is something called identitarianism. So when people are entering into political organizing, they're generally doing so because they have a deep commitment to justice, right? Most people who are taking part in political organizing are doing so because they want to do the right thing. They want to do something good in the world. And so they care very deeply about political issues. So when we obviously care about the climate, but we also presumably care about the treatment of our fellow human beings. And we want to fight all forms of oppression in our day-to-day lives. And that's a really good and positive impulse. One thing that can happen is that people can make accusations that certain organizing tactics, certain behaviors within the group are oppressive in particular ways. And then they can ground those accusations in identity by saying things like, this identity group has stated that this type of thing is oppressive, harmful, etc. And so when that happens, if you're being accused in this way and you are not in the identity group that the accusation is being grounded in, you can feel like, okay, I don't have the right to disagree with this because I am not a member of the affected group. And so again, that is a positive impulse in the sense that, you're trying to be humble, you're trying to learn, you're trying to listen and learn and keep an open mind. All of those things are really positive impulses. But what we have to understand is that no identity group is a monolith. No identity group has a singular perspective, and all identity groups have internal disagreement, political, cultural, individual, and class differences exist within all identity groups, right? And so it isn't actually appropriate for someone to speak on behalf of an entire identity group. If you look into the political discourse within any identity group, even on the left, you will find that there is disagreement about all sorts of things, right? So when we ground accusations in identity and act as if we are speaking on behalf of an identity group, we're actually reproducing something that is called essentialism. Essentialism is something that leftists have actually been trying to fight for a very long time. Essentialism is the idea that identity groups hold a certain kind of essence. They share some kind of truth, right? And we like racist tropes, homophobic tropes, sexist tropes are all based in a kind of essentialism that is flattening identity groups in a negative way into stereotypes. But we can also perform essentialism when we are saying things that are positive. For example, people will make very sweeping essentialist statements. Like I'm in Canada, so this is a frequent discourse in Canada. People will make very essentialist sweeping statements about Indigenous people and will say Indigenous people think this. They'll say it in a positive way, like Indigenous people have a very respectful relationship with the environment or something like this, right? Which sounds good, except for the fact that the umbrella category of Indigenous people is actually many different nations who have many different cultural practices. And within those groups, there's many different individuals who have different political ideas. And so it isn't actually okay to make sweeping statements about identity in this way because it flattens the differences between groups. So it actually reproduces the very thing that we are trying to move away from. So when I say this, I think people get kind of stressed out because they're like, okay, but how can we, ensure that we're not being oppressive, that we're not being harmful? And I think it's very positive that people have that question and that they want to be responsible. And so I'm not saying that we should just dismiss all feedback and say, okay, well, this is wreckerism, right? Sometimes feedback is important and sometimes feedback is necessary. And I think like the two guiding questions that we should be asking ourselves when feedback is coming to an organizing space is one, is everybody's human rights and dignity being respected here? Is everybody safe? Are these accusations about someone's human rights and dignity being violated? And then the second question is, are the goals, visions, and like stated aims of this organizing group being followed, right? Or not? So is the critique saying, hey, you guys said that your stated aim was this, but it seems like you're doing something else. So this feedback is to get you back on track to your stated aims. Those are the two main questions, because we want to make sure that people are obviously like not being harassed or dehumanized in the organizing space. Like that's something that we should take seriously. And if that's happening, obviously we should intervene. And we want to make sure that we're on track to our stated goals. But sometimes feedback will actually be derailing the organizing space away from its stated goals in a way where people are trying to basically reinvent the wheel or create, like, turn this organizing group into a totally different organizing group. So like just like a random example, you know, I worked with an organizing group similar to what you guys do that was doing like direct action as their strategy. And their whole thing was that they were doing direct action. Somebody made an accusation saying, you know, I think that you guys should be doing mutual aid because that is really needed for these various identity groups. And the fact that you're not doing mutual aid is oppressive and harmful. And so what this person was actually asking is that an organization with limited resources, time, energy, actually totally redirects what their stated aim is towards something else, right? And this isn't to say that mutual aid is not also important, but that was not the stated aim of this group, right? And so we need to not allow our political organizing to be derailed. And I think, especially in the conversation about climate, one of the things that's really fucking important here is that we acknowledge that we are in an emergency, right? This is an emergency. In an emergency, we really need to like streamline what we are focusing our time and attention on. We actually don't have the time to spend hours and hours and hours unpacking every single conflict and every single grievance, right? There's an article that I shared, and it will be in the chat, that I wrote about this, that is called "Political Organizing is Not Therapy." And we need to remember that, you know, our need to feel seen, heard, and validated is not necessarily going to be met in the organizing space, and that it isn't actually appropriate to derail an entire meeting and expect a large group of people to like take part in that process until you personally feel better, right? And so in doing this work, you know, I just really want to emphasize that, like, when I first put out the call that, you know, I was available to talk to people about these reputational attacks that are happening on the left, so many groups internationally reached out to me, right? So many groups reached out and explained that there were various kinds of harassment, cancellation, and reckerism campaigns that were happening either very publicly or more privately, and it was really preventing them from doing their work. So this is super, super common, and it's not just about whether or not you're doing things right or wrong. It's actually a dysfunctional behavior that exists on the left that is likely going to affect your organizing regardless of what you're doing. And so we need to be prepared for it. And one of the most important things that I want to say about this is that I think when people get involved with direct action, especially, you know, it takes so much courage to face down capitalism, to face down the police, right? People who are prepared to face arrest and who are like, you know, this is such a scary situation that we are in with climate crisis. I am prepared to risk arrest. That's a huge amount of courage. And there's a lot of people who are modeling that courage, and we need that courage. But I think what people don't actually prepare themselves for is what it feels like to be attacked from your own side, to be misrepresented, and to have your deepest, most fundamental values like flipped on their head publicly, and to be attacked from the very people who you consider to be your comrades in your community, right? People are actually more willing to go to jail than they are to experience reputational destruction within their own communities. And so because of this, it's super, super effective at completely derailing organizing because people don't know how to handle it, and they basically fold and collapse when this happens because they are so afraid of the experience of being misrepresented in this way. I've already said that, people do this type of behavior from a place of unresolved trauma, not having their needs met, from having experienced a lot of oppressive behavior in their lives. So it isn't like always coming from a malicious place. It's often coming from a place of feeling really powerless and unresourced, but it's still a really damaging behavior that we need to get under control. And we also need to know that the CIA actually created a manual that was leaked. And so we know that they were writing about this, where they were talking about how to undermine leftist organizers. And the tactics that they laid out are exactly the types of tactics that I'm talking about here, right? Derail the organizing space, take the organizing space away from its stated aims and embroil it in conflict and other topics so that the time, energy, trust, the important resources that are necessary for organizing are totally derailed. And so we also need to be aware that when we are doing organizing that is actually challenging oil and gas, there very well can be infiltration in our movements, and we need to know that. And that does not mean that we need to just go around accusing everyone of being a cop. But when people are doing behaviors that are exactly out of the CIA handbook, we need to be mature enough to say, hey, these behaviors, whether you are a secret CIA agent or not, like I guess you guys don't have the CIA there, I don't either, but whatever your intelligence agency is, regardless if you are or not, this is that same behavior and it is derailing and we can't afford it. And so when we're getting feedback, we really want to look at the feedback and say, is this feedback about helping us achieve our stated aims, or is this feedback about ensuring that people's dignity and human rights are respected? If not, should we be spending our time on this? Is this worth the time that it's taking, and the damage that it's doing to our organization when we are facing a climate crisis? And I think that the answer is it's not worth our time, and we need to actually refocus and move back to our goals and what we need to be working on. So that was, I mean, that was my best effort at saying it as fast as possible. I think that you guys have done a really great job here. Like I only saw part of it, but I think it's really, really awesome that you have laid out your values and your principles, right? This can be a guide for you when you receive feedback. You can check it against your principles to see if you are still in alignment with the stated principles and aims of the organization. So I don't know if I want to take up too much time because I feel like you guys still have more that you want to do, but maybe if people have questions, I could take like 1 or 2 questions.
Yes, that'd be absolutely wonderful if you could take a few questions. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for that. That was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, if people have any questions, let's whack them in the chat and we'll pick out a few. Yeah, I'll leave it up to you, Clementine, to pick out a
Okay,
couple
I'm
of
looking at the
questions.
chat. Hold on. Okay, here's the chat. And in the chat as well, you can see all of these podcast episodes that go into a lot more detail about what I was just talking about. So the question in the chat is, do you recommend specific conflict resolution mechanisms? So what I think is that we need to resolve conflict using as minimal resources as possible. I really think that we need to look at this from a realistic angle of we don't have a lot of resources. We don't have a lot of resources for the huge task that we're trying to do. And so the number one question when facing conflict is this worth the time and energy to be doing this? Because I think a lot of times when people are looking at conflict resolution and they're trying to find alternatives to cancel culture, what they often suggest as an alternative are very resource intensive, long drawn out processes, right? Accountability processes, conflict mediation processes that sometimes can literally look like couples therapy, like in how intense they are. And we don't have time for this, right? So the first question is like, how serious is this really when compared to the climate crisis? Like, is this worth the time and energy? And if it's possible to let it go, or if it's possible to be like, okay, we have a disagreement, but we agree on the climate crisis and what we're trying to do here, so let's put the disagreement aside. That is what I advise more than anything else. I don't think we should be wasting time on interpersonal conflict in organizing spaces if we can help it. If it is a situation where it's serious feedback and there's some disagreement about it, I think returning to those two main questions, is this about people's safety and human rights? Is this about like making sure we're on track? If it's the type of feedback that is saying, hey, I think we should be doing something totally different, then maybe the person should, if they really don't want to be doing this type of organizing and think that we should be doing a different kind of organizing, they might be better served to either join a different group or start a different group. Yes, that's my answer. Any other questions?
Thank you so much for that. There's got to be more. Oh, there we go.
There's one here. There's a couple more. Okay, so is there any way to tell the difference between rectorism and serious cultural issues that are holding our organizing back? So do need the time and space to be addressed. I think one of the key like indicators here is if this feedback is like an attack on the organization, is rectorism. Like if this feedback is trying to attack the organization. So as soon as it goes public, if people are calling out an organization online like that, it's rectorism because the organization is trying to do the important political work and now you're publicly undermining that. And this organization is trying to face down, the public who's mad about it, the police who are mad about it, the government who is mad about it. We don't need an online campaign, right? So if it's aggressive, hostile, attacking, and public, it's rectorism. I don't know in terms of cultural issues. Like, I mean, I saw the list of values that was stated here, right? So if people are practicing these values, I think that the culture is okay. If there's something else, I don't know, like are we reinventing the wheel again? And I think that we're so used to, I think we've been in a culture on the left where we've actually been rewarded for increasing grievance all the time, right? For constantly finding things to be critical about. And we're so used to that it can feel kind of shocking to be like, is this grievance even necessary? Like, do we even need to do this? Do things need to be perfect in order for us to move forward on our stated goals? And I think we need to actually build a lot more resilience to tolerating the fact that, yeah, sometimes organizing is annoying or we don't get along with people or there's disagreements or whatever, but we want to focus on the stated goals. So how can you shut down specific grievances respectfully without losing the people holding a particular belief? I think, yes, be respectful in your language. And you can just say, like, in this group, like, these are our goals, these are our goals, these are our values. And this feedback is this feedback helping us meet those goals? Is this feedback in alignment with those values? If it's not, then you can say that it's actually like a commitment of the group to use the very limited time and resources to focus on the stated goals and try to redirect people, right? And even saying like, it doesn't mean that everything that you guys are doing is perfect, but the goal is not perfection. The goal is to effectively carry out the political aims, right? And is the CIA document available somewhere? Yes, I believe you can find it online. Search COINTELPRO. I'll write it in the chat, COINTELPRO. And I think you can find it online. So I think that was all the questions that people asked.
Thank you so much. I saw Rowan. You've offered an anecdote. We do have a couple of minutes for Rowan anecdotes, seen as the legend you are. So if you would like to unmute yourself and bring that to the room for a couple of minutes, that'd be wonderful.
Oh, thank you. It's very quick. I just wanted to say that I've been organising and active for about 35 years, and I've seen many organisations implode or explode from the kind of difficulties that Clementine has been speaking about. And I've also come across one organisation, I won't say which one, which paid attention to these kinds of things, took skillful action to stop something like that happening, and which was a highly successful organisation. That's all.
Thanks for that, Rowan.
And maybe I'll just say one last thing, which is that like I really just like I want to encourage us to be brave, you know? And I know that being misrepresented, being attacked from our own side is one of the most painful things that can happen, right? It's really, really painful. And, you know, so is going to jail. And I think that if we are going to be so brave to face down the police, we need to find the courage to face this issue, right? And I think that if you guys I'm sure you can imagine the type of harassment that I receive for talking about this, okay? People who are really invested in this dysfunctional way of relating hate me. I have had my tires slashed. I have had liquid shit poured in my car because people are so mad about me challenging this dysfunction on the left, right? And so I have all sorts of, I call it like fan fiction at this point because people talk so much shit about me and misrepresent me in so many ways. And this is very painful. Like, I don't like it, obviously, but it's more important to me to make sure that the left can be effective because the problems that we are facing are literally like not just life and death, they are, you know, life on earth or not, you know? And so we need to be brave. And yes, it is stressful and painful, but I have seen organizations bounce back from this when they simply take the response of saying, I can see what this behavior is, and I'm not going to do this. Actually, we're going to go back to the stated aims of the organization and focus on that. And if you do that and you don't engage with it a lot, often it does dissipate, and you will be able to continue your work.